Some cities define art as a physical thing that can be in one place for 100 years. But how does video art fit into that? How does a temporary installation fit into that? How does a performance of spoken word poetry fit into that concept?
Welcome to Architecture, Design, and Photography. Today we are talking to Martha Weidmann. And Martha is the CEO and co-founder of 9 Arts. And typically here I would go into more of a bio and everything else, but I thought it'd be interesting if you could tell us about 9 Arts and your background and how you founded this, how it works and everything else, just as a good lead into this entire thing. So Martha Weidmann, thank you for joining us today, and tell us about the 9 Arts.
Thanks, Trent. Well, I'm excited to be here and learn more about what you're doing on your podcast and tell you a little bit about where we are at 9 Arts. So the company was founded in 2009 by my partner, Molly Casey, and I, and we both come from an arts background. So we're both trained artists. Mm-hmm. My degree is actually in photography, so I think we'll have some bonding to do over that. And my partner, her degree is in sculpture. So we both went to art school. After art school, ended up working in galleries for a period of time. And then we both met and kind of converged at a company called McGrath & Braun. That company was hit really hard during the recession. Ownership had transitioned, and that business ended up sunsetting. However, my partner and I came in and purchased the 3 contracts that were left in that company, helped them close that business down, made sure all the artists and vendors that they were working with got paid for projects that were outstanding, and began 9 Arts in the heart of the last recession.
So now was the, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, go ahead.
What was the McGrath Arts, was it?
Mm-hmm. And McGrath & Braun.
Now, was it a similar... Was it a similar business model to 9 Arts, or was it a part of it that you took out and kind of reimagined?
So good questions. There are some similarities and some things that we really wanted to change. Okay. So some of the similarities are that we help clients match with artists to tell their brand narrative and tell stories through an art experience. Mm-hmm. So that is really a similar through thread. But what's different is that we've really changed the business model to focus on consulting services. So unlike a gallery where there's an inventory of artwork and, you're going to come in and the gallerist is going to try and, match you with something that's in the racks. Our job is to be an independent consultant, an independent art advisor, and we will work with companies and represent them on their behalf with the arts community. So we'll help them match and pair to artists who are local to their project.
So business-wise, you keep less of a overhead warehouse of art to say on hand, and you have more so the ability to reach out at all the art available?
That's exactly right. So we can find any artwork available from any artist anywhere in the world. Okay. That's our job, is to know a little bit about everything, and matching the client to the right artist and the right artwork is the focus of the business. So consulting, curating. We do have artwork that's coming in and out of our office for client evaluation. So you'll always see those things turning over, new artwork coming in, artwork going out. It's always changing. So if you were to come by our office on any given day, you would see a plethora of gorgeous original works. But the next week, you'd come back and see something entirely different.
Wow. So is your office a pseudo gallery that's just in transition more often?
So our office, I like to consider it's like the luxury art storage / consulting firm. Yep. So when you come in, there's a reception area, and then you go right into the storage rack. So you'll see hundreds of artworks that are coming in, going out, being shipped, coming in for evaluation. You'll have a number of different presentation rooms, so conference style rooms where we might have large meetings on a public art master plan or, a 20-year roadmap for how to build an art collection for a neighborhood or a city. And then we have a section of our office that's all for studio, marketing, finance, and accounting. And so that's really open office space setup. So more like a professional services firm.
Gotcha. And what are your primary clients like? Not to get into specific names or anything, but more so, what type of clients do you typically have?
So our clients are typically developers for large scale, mixed use, multifamily, hospitality, senior living, healthcare. And then we're also doing work for cities who need art master plans. We're doing work for corporations who want to tell their brand story through an unusual or interesting narrative to relate to people who are coming into their office or to their employees.
Right.
So we've really worked hard to diversify our client base over the years, because after 10 years in business, you can really see swings in the economic marketplace. There were years where all of our focus was healthcare, and then some other years, all of our focus was hospitality, and then in other years, all of our focus was corporate. So you can actually see economic trends historically by looking at our clientele.
Now, an interesting question to me is like how has the acquisition of art changed with the ebb and flow of the economy from like the early aughts, 2000s, to this kind of newer situation of coming back from a recession, but then coming into COVID and everything else? How have you seen that whole progression grow, change, minimize, whatever?
Well, in terms of the process of acquisition, for me, there's been some really exciting things to watch. So 9.Art's clients have made leaps and bounds progress in being able to feel confident in selecting artwork digitally. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when we were first in this industry, no one would purchase a work of art without seeing it in person, in the flesh. And now the majority of our clients are working from digital surveys, virtual presentations, and almost all of the acquisition process and the selection process is happening virtually. We'll do studio visits over FaceTime. You know how you're doing your podcast and you've shifted and pivoted to be remote? We're doing that with artists now. So we visit studios remotely. Artists and clients are matched remotely. Clients are comfortable commissioning artworks remotely and virtually. So that's been a major industry shift to see the comfort with online purchasing or online acquisition. And then the next level, the thing that we're just starting to see incorporated more and more that I think will just continue that trend is artwork being a part of architecture, design, and construction rendering. So AR, VR. We finished a project recently with CSU for the National Western Center. So it was a higher education campus, 3 new significant buildings opening in 2022. Went through the process of public art master plan creation, calls for entry, going through all of the submissions, and to select the artist finalists, each of the designs was placed into the renderings for the building. And so you could put on the VR goggles. So we actually had the virtual renditions of the building, worked with the architecture team to have the artwork placed into the VR SketchUps.
Yep.
And you can put on the goggles and you go in and you can go up the stairs and see, oh, well, this artwork is, maybe it should even be a little bit longer, a bit more dense to fill the stairwell. We could push it closer towards the window. Then you can step outside and see, oh, from the exterior, we should probably push this a little bit closer towards the window.
Wow.
So you get a better view from outside. So it's very cool.
Do you think there's any, I wonder, because that is such a, it far more creates a objective experience rather than subjective talent, like within the head of someone like yourself, to be able to see art, see the space, and visualize that they'll go together and make a suggestion to a client. I'd imagine as humans, we're losing some kind of communication skills by incorporating virtual reality. But at the same time, you get the exact representation, except kind of like a video game of what's actually going in there. And it's kind of like that argument of, we shouldn't progress in technology in some areas because we'll lose this, that, or the other. But it's absolutely inevitable that it's going to happen. And you have to just kind of go with it, But that's kind of a weird comment, I guess.
Well, no, I think it's interesting because, when you have a rendering, when you can put on the VR goggles and you can now see the artwork in the building, well, now you have an expectation.
Right.
You have an expectation of precisely what that will be.
Right.
Versus, when you're working from a watercolor sketch or a maquette.
Yeah.
There's still a bit of room for interpretation on what this will be. There's still room for surprise. It's
a lot of reason why architects will use foam core models rather, like when they do a rendering of a building, sometimes like in computer, they'll leave it black and white just so people don't get too much of an expectation of exactly what it's going to be, that they let the viewer fill in things a tiny bit. But it seems like, using the virtual reality aspect of technology in this sense, it's like, wow, the deliverable is extremely precise to what the client expected, which in your position is like, that's translating into money and great reputation to people getting what they hope for. So.
Well, the big benefits are being able to see, some of the structural and MEP, conditions and how the artwork interacts with those.
Right.
So if we're talking about suspending a sculpture from the ceiling in a stairwell, we're going to need to look at the RCP. We're going to need to make sure that we've got structural supports in the ceiling. And when we're doing this in the VR modeling, you can actually see, you can see the inside of the building and how your installation is aligning or not with the structural work that's there, with the electrical work that's there, with the mechanical pieces that are already planned. So it gives you a huge advantage in the way of fabrication, installation accuracy, and controlling, any costs or change orders down the road when you can predict those things up front.
Right.
The other thing that's, really exciting for some clients is that you really actually can see it. I'll never forget when, we were still working with floor plans and cork boards and pinning up images of artwork and where they go on each plan and modeling this out in, a very physical way and a very low tech, and having a client that couldn't actually see the space without walking through it.
Right.
And I remember he had to close his eyes. And this is a renovation, right? This is a renovation. So you've actually, this building. It's just a few things are changing. And I remember in our office, he had to sit there and close his eyes and say, okay, now I'm walking down the hallway.
Right.
Now I'm going to turn now I'm going to see this on the right. And then he imagined it, but you're able to help people go so much farther, so much faster when you can deliver in a way that's, 3D, animated, virtual reality. Here's the art right now and what it looks like. It can really just streamline the process.
Yeah. You so much more of a precise deliverable and clearer communication in the whole process. So it's kind of like losing the skill of, killing a deer and making a bow and arrow and flint and everything else to, like actually like being able to go to the grocery store and get what you need rather than having to make every single part. And much more precise and advanced way of doing it. So that's interesting. It's interesting to me, the working for a city, developing a plan with art, public art. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, cities, have in a lot of cases had public art plans in place for some time. Some smaller cities don't have a public art plan, and then they'll bring us in to, create some unification within the community, write a long-term plan, and help them do acquisition, particularly if the town is going through, renovation or growth. But some cities, for example, Seattle's public art master plan was developed in the 1970s. Theirs was the very first in the country. Denver was developed in the 80s. And in those cases, our master plans and our municipal master plans in those cities are actually becoming a bit dated. So, for example, the way that art is defined in some municipal policies has become an outdated definition of art. For example, some cities define art as a physical thing that can be in one place for 100 years.
Right.
But how does video art fit into that? How does a temporary installation fit into that? How does a performance of spoken word poetry fit into that concept?
Right.
So in a lot of cases, it's helping cities to reimagine, policies that are now 50 years old.
Right. So we, Biddeford, the town that I live in and have my studio in here, we have a very active entity within the city called Heart of Biddeford that works with those kind of things to help Biddeford grow and change in a positive way. And right now the city is experiencing potentially a very steep gentrification that if we're not careful could be a very exclusionary thing, and a lot of the character and everything else of the town could be lost in that process. And pre-COVID, I was working with the head of that organization, Tammy Ackerman, who unfortunately has moved on. I have not met her replacement, but Tammy was like a saint to the city of Biddeford. But we had come up with a concept for the building that they own downtown that we were going to put an image, a portrait of someone who's, originally from here, in some way quoting them about talking about how great art, but where am I going to go? This idea of, yes, we need to improve the town, and yes, art is valuable, but at the same time, what's this do to the working class of people that have been in this town for so long, and how do you bring them along with this town growing without just pricing them out, 20 miles inland? So I think it would have been a really interesting thing to have this portrait of someone from downtown on the side of a building as large as the building with this quote to get people, driving by it. It's a temporary piece of art, but it's like a documentary kind of art that I'm fairly interested in, that would have caused a lot of conversation within the town and brought that subject to the consciousness of those around. That could have been really interesting, I think. So
yeah, those are complicated issues, and it's so important to generate community engagement in that process and make sure you're not, just coming in and wiping out and whitewashing the history of a place, right?
Yeah.
The history is so important, and that's where public art can really shine. Not necessarily bronze statues of, a historical figure, but an interpretation of how history is actually made new and how it influences our future. Those can be really powerful works of public art,
Right.
and things that really support the community in a positive way.
So I'd like to get a little philosophical around the ideas of art and how it comes into business practice and our actual lives and everything else. I'd like to, first of all, get your take on the definition of art.
Well, I love that question. That's kind of studio art class 101. The first thing that you discuss is the definition of art. And I'd say to this day, it's still quite a debated topic. For me, art is a creation of non-utilitarian function. And sometimes you can even define something by what it is not. So, for example, it's not a
theology.
It's not a hammer. It's not a building. It's not a spoon.
Right.
It's art. It doesn't have a proper purpose aside from, sending a message.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a wonderful TED Talk by Shea Ombre, and he takes this concept not just of the definition of art, but what makes a good work of art. And I love the way that he describes this. He talks about a good work of art displaying identities of the head, heart, and the hand. And so first he talks about the head of the art. This is the face of the person behind it, the intellectual ideas, the concepts of something that just makes it worth creating, makes it worth doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then he talks about the heart of the piece, that when it's created, it's clear you can see the passion that has gone into the creation, the emotion of the artist. And in the end, you can see that this work has heart and soul. And this becomes really notable when you speak to an artist about their work. They'll tell you in under 5 minutes about their idea, their concept, how they went about creating it. And you'll hear the passion in the story that they tell you about the creation of the work. And then the third way he defines a great work of art is the concept of the hand. And this is where craftsmanship comes into play. And when you sit down and think about this, it really resonates in many things, in artwork and beyond. It could be the same for musicians, writers, any other creative profession, architects, design. Great ideas and concepts, even with a passion for them, could be a train wreck if the craftsmanship isn't there.
Right.
So it's really making sure that the work that you create, that you take the time to go all the way through in that final production stage of art presentation to make sure that you're focusing on the details all the way through execution, and that you retain the head, the heart, and the hand from the moment that this idea came into your mind.
That's a good, it's not a anagram. What's the word I'm looking for where you take a name and reduce it to the letters of the beginning letter of each word of the description of it? I forget what. But that's a great way of thinking about, all right, what am I doing here as an artist? Like I consider myself a commercial artist. Being an architectural photographer is 98% of what I do. When I have free time, there's about 2% of that that's used making abstraction with my camera that I'm exploring with, right? And to think of that as far as the head, the heart, and the hand, that's Yeah, that's a really interesting 3-part process that goes into that. And it's also interesting to look at some photographers get really, really involved in the hand part of it because photography can be such a technical process that it becomes so deep into the really technical aspects as far as lenses, cameras, blah, blah, blah. But it all comes down to the emotion that is communicated with that final image, whatever it is, abstraction or representation of other art or of architecture or whatever. Um, Especially with photography, I find there's people that really get into the hand part of it. And it's interesting with the clients that I work with, some are very explorative, if that's the right way to say that, and looking at what is the emotion I'm trying to get out of this architecture and the experience that I'm trying to communicate into my branding, compared to like real estate photography would be far more informational, maybe a lot more head and hand, and there's not as much heart there. But some real estate agents that I've talked to, I don't really shoot real estate stuff anymore, but they kind of get it, like on the higher end homes, you're really selling an emotion, and if you have the right home, that you can sell an emotion and an experience through that. And so they kind of veer that way as well. And that's an interesting way of processing what art is, and to a degree evaluating and compartmentalizing different art that I interact with into, like, I have a piece of art in my home that this artist Heather Chontos did, and I talk about this often because it's one of my favorite artists, and I just happened to actually have worked with her when she was in Maine. And it is extremely heavy-handed, not in the hand, but in the heart and somewhat mind aspect of it. It's like canvas, emotion, and paint collided on in that moment, and there's something very emotive about it for me. And then other people see it and they're like, well, I could have had my kid do that, but I don't think they quite understand it. So it's I think it's just a personal thing maybe, but yeah.
Well, if I had each client that told me that their kid could do it, and my response is always, well, then they should. Then they should actually go make that. I would love to see their portfolio. Right. Do
Have
it.
them contact me when they're done. The another.
That's great, but I love that idea of keeping those things in harmony, right? Because there's always a time when it can feel that one perhaps dominates over some others.
Yep.
And especially when we get into kind of commercial work or work that's for someone else. But true art really has a harmony between those three aspects. Was the word you were thinking of mnemonic device?
That might be it. I'm not really all that good with words.
Anagram?
Yeah.
No. That's forward and backward. Backward.
We'll figure it out before the end of the podcast, maybe. But I have another theory, because you're so involved with art, that I'd love to run past you about the difference between science and art and the value in them. And it seems like there's a realm of articulated knowledge that we exist in, and the artist is generally a more liberal personality type. And I'm not talking politics here. I'm talking a base level personality type that's more open to experience. And the artist will often venture into the unknown, the chaos, and experience something because they're open to experience, and will process that and will bring it back and test it against the articulated knowledge that we all accept, to see if they have found something worth of being included to some extent within the lexicon of our articulated knowledge experience. So an artist goes out there, has experiences, translates that into their art, and offers it to the public within our sphere. And if enough people connect with that and see some further truth in it, it becomes of value to our story and our progress. And in contrast, I think, not contrast, but in complement, I think science grounds itself in articulated knowledge and peers into the unknown, into the chaos as a means of investigating it, rather than itself just completely venturing into that and being at risk themselves personally in that chaos. It's a complementary process, I think. And it was interesting to me. My assistant and I were driving to an architectural shoot, and we drove across the Green Bridge that goes into Boston. Again, not great with words, whatever its name is. And it hit me that the more conservative personality types manage and organize and maintain everything that keeps us safe and keeps us moving. And the more liberal personality types venture out into the unknown, search for more truth, and then come back and try to introduce it into our organization of society, and it's either defended against or accepted. And it's an extreme risk to go out into the unknown and find further truth and bring it in to yourself personally. But when you do, you're very highly rewarded. And, that's, I think, the envy and both curse of the artist lifestyle, is that you are at such risk going into the unknown, and it's very unlikely that you're going to find something worthwhile that no one else has found. It's very difficult, but when you do, when you can, you are highly rewarded for it.
I love the comparison you're making between art and science, because there's so many parallels to those two practices, and they're both really based in experimentation,
right,
and trying something new. I think the major difference between art and science is that in art, there are no wrong answers.
Right.
There's no right or wrong. And you could, make a case for your truth and your reality in a work of art, and redefine reality, where science has a grounding in a shared truth, a shared knowledge that is proven. There's scientific method that proves this is fact or fiction.
Right.
And in art, there is no test. And in fact, it's okay. Well, it could be true or not true, right?
I think there is a test, and that test is in the subjective person, the subjective experience of every person that then views or experiences, or, whatever the art is. And it's a far more subjective agreement from the mass to allocate worth to that art. And that, again, is the risk. It might be of extreme value to that artist, but if the deeper truth you can connect to, the more people it will relate to. And you might have art that is extremely valuable to a single person and help them come to some meaning or conclusion in their life that gives them meaning and interprets reality, but it might only very specifically mean something to them. And I think that's somewhere where everybody agrees that the Mona Lisa has some subtlety to it that people gravitate towards. And another thing, I think that art is the result of personal risk and personal experience, rather than a estimated and objectively planned out experimentation of science. So there's some kind of personal risk and everything else that's involved, I think, in the creation of art that gives it a different thing than science. And both obviously complementary and of equal value, in my opinion, but different in their X factor and feel of how they get to that process, obviously. But I think I probably lost everyone on that one.
Well, what you're talking about, what I like and what you're talking about, is that you're highlighting the importance of the audience.
Yes.
You're highlighting the importance of the experience of the people who see it.
Mm-hmm.
And that really is where art comes alive. Here in your studio, you make a work, but no artist is dreaming of creating a work that then sits in their studio for their lifetime. Artists want their work to be seen because they want to connect. They want to connect with people. They want to share this message, this creation, this thing with the world. And that's where the audience engagement piece is so important. How is an art experience generating a feeling? How is it telling a story? How is it creating, a response, an emotive response that truly is difficult to create with many other tools? Right. Artwork is an incredibly powerful tool to create an experience and to create a memory, right, that can be hard to generate with other media.
Yeah, it's the rock star thing that, so many kids want to be rock stars, but it's such a risk. But when they hit on the pulse, the ones that do on the pulse of the collective society, everyone relates to that, and it's a rocket of stardom and everything else, that they've created something that connects with so many people at that time. And it's just interesting how much of a risk, but how much of a reward at the same time it is. But I guess that's obvious that if you do something that's risky, there's going to be a big payoff if it doesn't consume you in the process. So, yeah. Now, what should art do for a space and the viewer? So when you're approaching, say, a lawyer's office that wants a good art collection to complement what they do and people coming, compared to like Dow Chemical or whatever, a different client and a different process, how much do you base it off of the art should speak to what these people do, or art should speak to just the feel of the feel of the space? Like, how do you judge and compare and recommend on those things?
Well, the first thing that we do in our work that I think is just critically important to understanding our clients is we go through a visioning session. So we'll go through a vision development process to create a project roadmap. And in that vision development process, we're curating a narrative of what that client is about, what is their story, what is their culture, what is the image that they want to portray to the world, what's the diversity of their audience and their thought process, and how do we convey that in the collection? Because this grouping of artists and their work is going to be the living embodiment of their institution. So, for example, with a bank, they might have an approach that says we want to convey longevity, reliability, strength, fortitude, and those works. So an artwork that could convey things like grounding and longevity might be a painting of a landscape that includes a horizon line, because horizon lines are grounding. They show us where we are, and a big expansive sky can display ideas of longevity and opportunity and big horizon. Now, you might have a tech company that's looking for things that are more innovative, cutting edge, showing that we are constantly reimagining how we do things and we move fast. And so that type of installation might be more using an actual physical media that's more progressive. For example, a responsive installation. So you might have a video wall installation that actually responds to people when they walk past it. It might change based on the number of people that are in the office, the number of people that are engaging with it, or some of the most consistent messages being searched or words being searched that day. So, some of it has to do with the media. Some of it has to do with the actual style and composition, but all of it relates to the vision that we're looking to create through this art experience.
All right. That's interesting to yeah, the visioning process. I was talking with another person about that, to really be able to listen, absorb, and then translate that into the art that speaks to that. Do you find different businesses are harder to sell art to than others?
That's an interesting question. So, I feel like I've never sold a piece of artwork a day in my life. Uh, all we've done is really, talk to people about what they're interested in and shown them ways to convey that concept in a new way. And so if you're doing the job well, there's really no selling involved. So it's really making sure that you understand what those early vision concepts are, that you really nail the narrative. If you nail the narrative, then the artist selection and artist matching just makes perfect sense. It all falls right into place. And, what I can say is that client personas, companies can take on the personalities of their leader. And sometimes client personas can really come through, or corporate personality can really come through in an installation.
Okay.
Some institutions are more confrontational. We've had litigation attorneys that have some seriously kind of more confrontational style work. And then some leaders from the hospitality industry who really focus on things that are whimsical and humorous and fun. And how do you, enjoy that experience? I think personally, experiencing a work of art, I quite enjoy artwork that makes me laugh. And I think of one installation by an artist named Jim Green. He focuses on sound as a medium, sound installation. And he had a room at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver. Walked into the room and the space was totally silent. And on the wall was a series of whoopee cushions in different colors, displayed in equal spacing from each other, precisely on the wall. And they were sandwiched between two pieces of plexiglass. And after standing there for, 45 seconds, 60 seconds, the plexiglass had a compression element. And at different times, the compression would begin to squeeze and whoopee cushions would go off every few seconds, an echo resonating throughout the gallery. Absolutely hysterical, unexpected, in this proper setting in a museum, to just then, hear the sounds of people ripping it all through. Right, it was hysterical and wonderful.
My kids would have loved that.
They would have loved it.
I would have loved that.
Oh, people were just losing it. And, sometimes there'd be more stuffy people in the room that would feel kind of a little awkward, like,
my dad.
This isn't me. This isn't me. And walk into the next room.
Have you seen Who the Fuck is Jackson Pollock?
I haven't. Have you? Tell me about it.
So this woman who's a truck driver and takes no guff from no one, bought her friend a large piece of art at a garage sale for like $15, and it's pretty obvious that it was a Jackson Pollock. Now, the fine art community would not accept it. And
I remember reading about this.
It is interesting. But the most interesting part of it was the fine art critic that they interviewed, and to watch him interact with the art. And he did all these weird things to judge the art. And he was such a show pony of immense magnitude. But I think he might have, I think he knew what he was doing too. It is so vastly interesting to look into the high art, fine art community and see how much pretense, but also how much money and influence and power, game playing, all of that is involved. It's like a soap opera on the most intense level, but there's something there, right? It's a really, really interesting documentary to watch. She got an offer for like 3 million for this thing, and she still
Wow.
didn't take it. I think she may have died while still owning it, and she lives in like Inland Empire, California, I think. And she was just dead set that I've had this evaluated. Multiple sources that are reputable have said this is a Jackson Pollock, but the community that has the money to pay for that, the gatekeepers, won't admit it, and so it won't be purchased. And I think some Arab prince or something had offered like a bunch of money, and she was just like, "This is what it's worth. I want it." She wouldn't take it. It's super interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I highly recommend it. It makes me want to see documentaries into the depths of the high art community and see all the oddities going on there.
It's a strange world, without a doubt. And one of the reasons that we exist is to make art approachable and to make the process transparent,
Mm-hmm.
because the art world has spent decades trying to create, this high status, like it's up on a pedestal
Yeah.
in a high castle, and it's opaque and you don't understand. And our
Right.
philosophy is the exact opposite. Everyone has a connection with art. Art can resonate with every person in the world, and all of those opinions are valid. And so we choose to work with living, working artists, because that's making a difference in the lives of creative people who are working today. A lot of times when you see opacity or things that look peculiar, where you hear those high dollar value sales, those are secondary market valuations. So the artists aren't even alive anymore. Those funds aren't going to them.
Yeah.
So they're going to dealers and people who trade in those works. We deal in primary market, meaning that we purchase works directly from living, working artists, because we represent companies that want to support the communities that they're building in, the communities that they're investing in. And so it's important, especially to our clients, these companies, these institutions, these municipalities, that they're making a direct connection on the living members of their community who are creative.
Wow. So we did a project. So I'm gonna steer this conversation a little more personal towards my experience and where I'm trying to go, because I think that might communicate to an additional layer of the podcast audience that watches this. And I'm naturally a selfish person. I'll just put that on the table. So, but anyways,
I think we all are.
yes, I excel at it though. So we did a project a while ago. You might be able to see, well, these little guys right here. These are 12 very large portraits of prison inmates back there. Very hard for you to see. I'll share them with you some other time. But we had.
This is your Reflect project,
yes,
right?
Yes. Had you looked at that online or?
Yes, I really wanted to learn more about it. So I'd love to hear the story behind it. It looked very cool.
Yeah, I had a friend that did some despicable things and went to prison for I think he's probably going to be gone for like 30 years. And we had grown up in a similar, well, he was the brother of a very close friend of mine, an older brother. And I spent a lot of time around him, and he was a very upstanding guy, but turns out, we've all got our darker demons, I guess. So he went away for a while, but I watched him growing up. He was probably 4 years older than me. And I thought, geez, this guy's gone through practically the same life as me, yet he's in prison now for quite a while. His 4 or 5 kids are not going to have a father, and his wife's going to be husbandless and blah, blah, blah. And it really made me kind of think about, there, but for the grace of God, go I, And I got to the point where I needed to do some personal projects rather than just continually shooting very expensive creations of other people, architecture. And so my studio manager, Tim, and I came up with the idea of doing portraits of prison inmates that we then had them write a letter in their own handwriting to their younger self pre-prison, and then we took that letter and digitally manipulated it to go around them in the portrait, so the viewer could come to this, documentation of the person that we've added our lighting and drama to, and then they could read in the inmate's handwriting their letter to their younger self. And the interesting experience just in that work of what I call docu-art, I don't consider it a true work of art that's only my experience. Like, I'm documenting someone and translating that into a work of art, I guess. The interesting experience is that you could stand in front of it and you were visually seeing the individual in a very dramatic light. And then you were reading their handwritten letter, which is not all that common anymore to see handwriting. And you were eavesdropping on a conversation that was giving advice to someone else. And you knew the outcome and where that person sat now. So there was this whole experience going on as you would take that project in, right? And we put it up in a local gallery here through Heart of Biddeford Engine with Tammy Ackerman, Main Street, Biddeford here, which when we did this still was, a very out of the way town. But the experience of viewing those was extremely powerful for the people that came. And I think it stayed up. It should have been like 2 weeks, and it stayed up for like 3 months. And because of demand of people coming to look at it, people that were coming to Maine on vacation were like changing their schedule to come and see it. Like, there was something about the translation of experience into art in this documentary format that was very, very powerful to people. And the way we displayed it, my assistant, Corey DeRocher, who's a very good artist in fine art photography as well, he did portraits of the prison guards. So in the center of the gallery, you had somewhat smaller portraits of the prison guards lit in a different manner that were looking at the backs of the viewers looking at the prison inmates. And over the audio in the gallery, we had recorded the sounds of the prison when we were there shooting that day. So the whole experience had a very low level of very reflective music, and then sounds of the prison, and then portraits of the prison guards looking at you as you were looking at these portraits and letters of the inmates. And then we also had a chain link fence on the back of the gallery where people could write things to their younger self and tie it onto the chain link fence. And the whole thing was really interesting. It was very interesting to see how immersive it was for everyone from the businessman to the soccer mom to actually put themselves in the shoes of the person they were looking at. I mean, a lot of people were just sitting there reading and crying. And to me, it was the most valuable thing I've ever done with what talent I do have as a photographer, to translate that human experience into something that generated empathy and thought for the experience of others. It was extremely powerful. And the interesting thing is, there were still so many requests for these things to be seen that we put them up in a mill that's been developed into small businesses and apartments just in the hallway. But eventually the workers in that mill took it upon themselves to take it down because it was so emotive that they did not want to see them every day. I've never sold any of these. No one's wanted to buy them, but everyone wanted to see them. It's like a car wreck. It's a very odd thing. And so
you just can't stop looking.
Yeah, it was an interesting process, but you don't want it in your living room or bedroom. It's not that kind of thing. And so we're taking that process. I desperately want to eventually turn this into like a very good, it could be a very good coffee table book to a degree, I think, of doing that treatment around individuals that have had pivoting life experiences, soldiers that have seen lethal action in war, people that have won the lottery, parents that have lost children, like all of these very, very life-changing experiences and what they've learned from it, to be able to flip through the lives of people and read their handwriting in a single page summary to what they would advise their younger self on this very illuminating experience is just really, really incredible. But the downside is I keep making money taking pictures of architecture, and I want to pay for my family. So there you go.
Well, it's very common that artists have day jobs. You know, many of the Dada artists did window displays, commercial window displays for department stores during the day, and then made their artwork at night and on the weekends. So, you know, I think it's true of many creative people. You have, you know, one role that supports one function and one purpose. Yep. That might be income. And then you have your art that's really for you. It's for your exploration of a particular idea. Right? That's that head, heart, and hand. That's what that's for.
So what would be your recommendation to a commercial artist like myself who's looking to develop art, like simply art around or in a way that they work commercially to then translate that into art that they could market and share with the world through interacting with someone like yourself, an entity like yourself? What's the recommendation of, like, when people ask me, how do I become a photographer? I never tell them go to photography school. I tell them study the subject that you actually want to photograph. And the technical aspects of being a photographer will fall into place through YouTube. You know, it's not a really steep learning curve, in my opinion. It's more so developing your aesthetic that's informed by your knowledge of the subject matter, right? So if I'm taking my very commercial approach and what I do with architecture, how do I best turn what I want to do as fine art into something that's also financially viable and at least self-supporting to grow?
Well, I'll answer the question about making art in terms of, you know, knowing if it's financially viable. I think that's the risk you take going in, right? Because when you're creating artwork, at least initially, you're doing it for that idea, right? The head, the heart, and the hand, those three things that are so strongly within you that you really have no choice but to create, to get it out, because it's something that you're compelled to do.
Right.
Artists don't, you know, in many cases, they don't choose to be an artist because it's not for everyone. You know, artists do it because they must.
Right.
Because they have to. It's this driving force within you to get this idea out into the world. And, you know, if you're interested in exploring that as a photographer, I think the first thing you have to do is think about, what is the work that you want to make? What is the story that you want to tell? Because this is not for a client. This is for you. And you've got to think about, what can you explore? What could you spend years studying, shooting, researching, and never be bored, never get bored of?
This is hard advice for me to accept, because I have a major subject in front of me that I've spent years investigating and working on. And I know I must do, but I'm scared to do. So, which is totally separate from the Reflect project. But it's good to hear. So, sorry.
That's how you know it's right, though. That's how you know it's right. It's the thing that you can't stop thinking about.
Yeah, that's it. All right.
Right?
Okay. Sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I think that it's interesting that you have one, right? You know what it is. You knew exactly what it was when we went through that description. Your mind, you knew exactly, because you had it tucked away. You knew the thing that you wanted to explore. And that's how you become an artist, is you explore that thing. And if you tell that story well, then there's a hope that the world will want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
And I think as a commercial photographer, it's just important, and I'm going into a very technical component now, but important about separating your brand identity. So, some artists, I'll give an example. A friend of mine and photographer, Adair Rutledge, her fine artwork is her artist brand and her name, Adair Rutledge. But in early times in her career, she had a commercial brand for family portrait photography, and she called it Pete and Zoe. And she was exceptionally skilled in this work. It was, lucrative, enjoyable, but it wasn't her fine artwork. Mm-hmm. But she used that brand as a tool to generate income so that she could fund her artistic projects. Yeah. So, it really is a great privilege to be an artist and get to the point where you can explore those ideas, and people take different paths to get there. So be kind to yourself too, be patient. Sometimes it takes time to explore the ideas, but if you can carve out the space and time little by little, you'll get there.
Yeah, the full advice I already know, and I'm scared to take it. That's interesting.
So you don't need me. You know what to do.
No, you know things sometimes, but you have to have people outside of you help you realize what you know, and because you can sit there in self-doubt and dismissiveness and kind of put it to sleep slowly and just take joy in the comforts of the money that you're making and just enjoy your life and not delve into what your real contribution could be. I could just choose to enjoy this money and not stick my neck out, kind of thing, so I think there's a responsibility there that's important. So
well, Trent, you asked about artists working with people like us. We actually do have an online way for artists to share portfolios. Mm-hmm. Is that something I could share with your audience if they might be interested?
Yes.
So for artists, we set up an online portfolio database, and you can find us there at .folioart.com. It's DOTFOLIOART.com. That's our artist portal window. So you can upload your portfolio of work, tell us about sizes, media, your artist vision statement and CV can be uploaded that way too. And it allows our curatorial team to access your portfolio instantly. So we have a multitude of curators on staff. So all the curators will be able to see your work if you upload through that website. And it's really exciting for us to find new artists. I mean, that's what this role is all about, is finding emerging talent and matching it with our clientele.
Cool. So you saw the Reflect project. Did you look at the abstract stuff that I've done?
I did.
Okay, so
yeah, there's the beautiful water series. Yeah.
So let me make
give it a shot.
Let me make you a little uncomfortable by asking you to be extremely honest and extremely critical. I always tell people that contact me for advice on their architectural portfolio that they're developing. I tell them, first of all, I don't know you, and I don't generally have that much concern for coddling you, because you're asking for me to give my critical feedback to help you grow. So if you're going to get your feelings hurt, don't ask me to weigh in on this, right? And I'm asking you to not worry about my feelings or publicly disgracing me. It's fine. No one's bought or any of my abstract blah, blah, blah stuff that I've done, okay? So that out there, like, you're a valuable person to me to get your honest opinion on the abstract stuff that I've done, okay? And you looked at some of it. It's abstract, very abstract, all created with a medium format camera. I found some ways of shifting stuff around and capturing it all in a single frame, which was interesting to me. And then also kind of in post-production, combining some of it with stationary objects and everything else, and it's fun. But I know it's fun for me and I like it, but from your professional point of view, if someone were to submit that same, work of art, what's the real feedback and the most discouraging things you can say, right? I'm looking for that very critical, honest opinion.
Well, there are very, very few people that I meet that I think actually need discouraging. That does not happen often.
Maybe that's said wrong, but I think you know what I mean. I'm looking for honest feedback.
But, in terms of honest feedback, I would say first, the works that I saw in the abstract series, I saw the works that were they looked like really serene oceanscapes where most of the frame is filled with a bluish scene. And it seems like the water and the sky almost blur a bit. And so you get the sense that you're in a really vast, expansive space, but you're not quite sure where. It could be Maine, it could be Spain,
right.
But you have a sense that you're on the water. And for me, those types of works are very relaxing. They're very calming. Those are the kinds of images that would be appropriate in, a place like a spa or an area that might have high tension and you're looking to calm the audience down. And I think there's really a place for that kind of work in the world, especially if you're using medium format photography. What that means, the difference that you have, the leg up that you have as a competitive advantage, is that image could be massive.
Yes, that's the whole idea when I did these. I have a friend who's a furniture maker, and I was going to get these printed massive, but get them framed with a very, very well done, he's a master craftsman with wood.
So when I saw those, my first thought was, you need to take the leap to make them big. I mean, wallpaper size. Yep. These need to be the size of the wall and maybe even go onto the ceiling and the floor too. Or there need to be a series of them lined up as beautiful little teeny tiny jewel boxes in a really deep frame, but that each of those elements is structured to view in a way that you were almost peering in through like a telescope or peering into another universe. But you either need to go really small and force your audience to come in really closely, or go really, really big. Right. And so this whole idea just envelops the people who are around it.
Now it's the seascape ones. To me, the interest there is the horizon. The way they're done, the horizon often can stay very crisp, but the subject matter, which is usually very horizontal, waves, beach, even clouds, can be abstracted but still say the same thing, but allow for a different interpretation and a softer thing going on while you still have that crisp horizon. And the colors are very calming in those. Now, the ones where I've shifted and blurred, I wanted to try that same approach, but do it in an area where you could abstract and blur things vertically. I found I could do that in the woods if you found the right kind of trees. But it's a little more a little more agitating, I think, when things blur vertically rather than horizontally. And I don't know why, but if you it feels kind of like a horror movie where it's like, like something's really amiss if things are blurring vertically. Whereas if they're blurring horizontally, you're just kind of turning your head, maybe, is the idea that your brain interprets. Whereas if it's blurring vertically, you're falling. Maybe that's, I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting take on how those might make you feel. And I must admit, I did not see the vertical abstract series. So my only critique there is to maybe load some lower res images on the site, because it was a long load time.
Oh, really?
To get the images to come up. Maybe it was my connection, maybe they're high res images, but in this world of digital access, we all expect things instantly.
Right.
So I want to see it right at that moment.
Fair critique there. Yeah, we need to look into the technicality of that. But yeah, all of my still art, I never cared to develop fine art representation through photography until this bigger project that's weighing on me came into view. And then it made me have this desire to abstract things visually as an exploration, which is interesting to me. So I still have this more this creative process that's a quicker turnaround with still photography and abstraction, but there's still this gorilla on my back in this other area that's driving me to create something else there. But it's a huge thing. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Now. Let's see, what are some other talking points? There's a few other I had here. So you're generally the entity that's interpreting what businesses are looking for in art. You'll interpret that and then make recommendations. How is then technology influencing the art world these days?
Well, we talked about this a little bit earlier in the conversation. That's really been the major shift in the market space. So, when you represent businesses and help them tell their brand story through an art experience, you have to really shift the way that you work to accommodate the business clientele. And, back in the time when my business partner and I first began, we had slide carousels. There were fax machines where you would send people proposals. Now all of the proposals are digital. You take an e-signature. The image reviews come. Not only are we doing image reviews digitally, but we're using a polling app. And so you can poll the committee as you go through and get real-time feedback, real-time response. It's almost as if we get more input from more people now than we had in the past. And then taking that input and turning it into a collection becomes really powerful because now you have things documented and you can promote them on your website with labels that have QR codes, with a walking tour brochure. And through that experience from just building the collection until it gets installed and you're creating these engaging materials around, we've seen advances in construction and virtual reality and the ability to utilize renderings and virtual mock-ups of major public art installations into the buildings and the environments where the work is going to go. And that's been just an incredible game changer and a way that technology and advances in technology have made the experience quite seamless for our clients and for artists.
What are some of the more impressive digital interactive art installations you've seen? Like I was out in Palm Springs just before March when COVID broke out. I think it was this year, maybe it was last year, but they were having a whole installation out there where you'd walk around with your phone in virtual reality and go and interact with virtual art. It was a really interesting thing. What are some of the things you've seen and recommended to clients and clients have purchased that is very technologically driven in its representation?
There's actually one installation that we worked on back in 2012 was for the Metro State University campus, their student success building. And at that building, there is a large corridor that has multiple classrooms. And, you can imagine these big university campus corridors where students are flowing in and out.
Right.
And in that corridor, we did a video installation. And the video installation sits at the end of the hallway. And it's a very close-up shot of a set of lips. This is a work by Luzia Ornelas. And the lips are there on the screen, just kind of waiting like this. And as students come out of the classrooms, or if they're changing, if one class is changing while another one is happening, the lips will remind them, shh.
Oh, that's awesome.
And the louder the students become, the more she'll remind you, shh. There's a class in session.
Do the lips change, like old person, young person, woman, man, or are they always
they're
the
one.
same set?
It's always one.
Yep.
There's always one. You know who they are, but she shifts, right? She shifts based on the environment and who's there. And so for me, those engaging, interactive pieces that actually, serve a part of the purpose of this installation. So not only was she a local sound video installation artist, but the work itself speaks to what the university does. We're holding class here. So here's how you participate. So those are the kinds of installations that I think are really meaningful in a digital way.
A great Easter egg in that one would be if it gets a little too loud that she actually yells once,
We should program that in. You can always update.
That'd be great. Final question. What does the future of art and design look like after quarantine, you think?
Well, I think that there are two things that will remain to be very popular after quarantine and trends that are happening right now. Number one is local artists. The big name, the big international superstars, they're wonderful to have as part of the arts, community. But it's more important now than ever that we support local talent. Businesses understand that. Cities understand that. And not only is it important to supporting the livelihood of creative people in our country, but it's also just makes good business sense because you can work with an emerging local artist and provide them with an opportunity that perhaps they haven't had before. Again, this is a risk, but if you are working with a skilled consultant, they can coach the artist and you through this process of commissioning a work with an emerging artist. And the other part about it that just makes good business sense is, frankly, trade deals around different countries and international shipping right now is always a question mark. We've worked with artists from about 20 different countries. And every time we have a work shipped in, depending on the country it's coming in from, you might have a waiting period or a holding period. We also have had clients in other countries as well. I think what's most important now is to understand the value of domestic creative talent in our supply chain, because it's right here and it's available and ready to go. So to me, local is huge. Trend number one that is becoming more important in quarantine that will continue into the future. And trend number two is large scale, high impact outdoor artwork. So when you think of an outdoor installation or a public art installation, you usually get to stand pretty far away and you get to see it from a great distance. Viewing distance and social distance go hand in hand.
Right.
And I believe that this idea will only stay popular. So large-scale installations that take over alleys and activate outdoor alley spaces or outdoor areas on city blocks or outdoor parks. I think this whole concept of bringing culture to our outdoor space is going to be so critical now and into the future.
Well, I got to really say thank you for a lot of good things to think about and add into my thought process when approaching the creation of art, but also thinking about where ultimately, if I do personally go down that road more, how to develop it. The head, heart, and hand thing is a big one for me to keep in mind, but also really great to hear about your business model and process and where it's come from and where it's going to and how that all is changing. And yeah, really appreciate the time you've taken to talk with us and familiarize us with your business and process. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Trent. Thanks for having me and talking about 9.arts on the show. Really enjoyed being with you and learning more about your experience as architecture, photography, and as an artist. So thanks for the time.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.